In an astonishing twist that no one ever saw coming, the enigmatic Barron Trump, long cloaked in silence and shadow, stepped into the light to shatter decades of expectation. For 18 long years, he had been the silent observer of a nation in turmoil, his name whispered in corridors of power, yet his own voice conspicuously absent from the conversation. But on one unforgettable night, under the brilliance of stage lights that cut through the darkness like beams of destiny, everything changed. In a packed auditorium filled with anticipation and a palpable sense of urgency, a young man who had once lived in the margins finally took his place at the microphone. The transformation was immediate and profound. As Barron's eyes swept over the crowd, a sea of eager faces, skeptical gazes, and hopeful hearts, the atmosphere shifted from indifference to a charged electric silence. It was as if, in that very moment, the collective breath of a nation was held captive by the promise of a voice that had been silenced for far too long. From a young age, Barron had grown up amid relentless media scrutiny, the unyielding pressures of political storms, and the weight of expectations tied to one of the most powerful families in America. He was known by name, yet few truly knew him. He was seen in fleeting photographs and brief glances, always composed with piercing eyes that hinted at depths of thought and emotion. Unlike his celebrated parents, whose words could ignite headlines and captivate the public, Barron's own voice had been hidden, subdued by a lifetime of being used as a pawn in narratives crafted by others. In those early years, every word he might utter was a double-edged sword. He learned quickly that even the slightest expression could be twisted, dissected, and repurposed to serve agendas far removed from his own truth. It was a lesson that drove him to retreat into silence, choosing instead to observe the world around him. He absorbed the tumult of American society, the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots, the soaring costs of education, the relentless advance of technology that left countless dreams in its wake, and he did so in quiet solitude, a silent witness to the unfolding drama of his nation. Yet beneath that calm exterior, a storm was gathering. Barron watched as young people, burdened with crushing debt and facing an uncertain future, found their voices stifled by a system that seemed indifferent to their struggles. He saw the frustration in the eyes of students and workers alike, the despair of those who felt invisible in the eyes of those in power, comments on social media, desperate pleas for acknowledgement, and the heart-wrenching stories of those left behind. All these experiences etched themselves into his consciousness. They planted a seed of doubt in the notion that silence was a safe haven. Instead, it began to feel like a form of complicity. The turning point came on a night that was both ordinary and extraordinary. As Barron sat alone in his vast, luxurious room, a room that many would envy, he was illuminated not by the glamour of wealth, but by the harsh, unyielding glow of his computer screen. There, news of protests and raw, unfiltered stories of struggle played out before him. He saw images of young people, shoulder to shoulder in defiant unity, holding up signs with messages that cut through the noise. We don't want a future drowned in debt. We need real jobs, not empty promises. In that moment, when a young woman's sign was clutched desperately as she was pushed aside by indifferent authorities, something deep inside him shattered. The silence he had maintained for so long no longer felt like a shield. It felt like surrender. The faces of those he had seen in fleeting moments, burdened by a future they never chose, demanded to be heard. Barron's heart pounded with a mix of anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming need to act. The idea that his voice, long held captive by circumstance and expectation, could be the catalyst for change began to burn like a fierce, unquenchable flame. That night, as the world outside continued its relentless march, politicians bickering, economies faltering, and citizens crying out for justice, Barron Trump made a decision that would alter not only his own destiny, but potentially the future of an entire generation. The screen that had once been his solitary companion transformed into a portal for a new beginning. He hesitated only for a moment, then placed trembling hands on the keyboard, composing the first words of a speech that would reverberate far beyond the confines of his quiet room. This was no ordinary address. It was a declaration born of decades of suppressed emotions, a manifesto fueled by the stories of everyday people who had been ignored and marginalized. In that silent hour, Barron realized that if he continued to let his voice be used as a tool by others, then the very chance for real change would slip through the fingers of an entire generation. His decision was not born of political ambition, but of a deep, unwavering commitment to be the voice for those who had been silenced. As the first words appeared on the screen, so too did the promise of transformation. The dawn of his public speaking journey was breaking, heralding the beginning of a new era where the unheard would finally find resonance. And thus, in the flicker of a computer screen and the echo of a silent determination, Barron Trump stepped away from the shadows, ready to ignite a movement that would forever change the landscape of American discourse. In the days following that fateful night of silent reckoning, Barron Trump found himself wrestling with the enormity of what he had witnessed. The images of defiant protests, the anguished faces of young people shackled by debt, and the quiet desperation of those left behind in an ever-evolving nation weighed heavily on him. For years, he had observed from afar, a silent bystander to the unfolding struggles of everyday Americans, but now the burdens of injustice were too vivid to ignore. As Barron scrolled through endless social media comments and news feeds, he began to grasp the profound discontent permeating the country. He read raw confessions of disillusionment from college students whose dreams were buried under the crushing weight of insurmountable loans. He saw the tired, determined eyes of workers who had been replaced by the relentless march of automation and artificial intelligence, their livelihoods suddenly rendered obsolete. Each story, each digital plea for change resonated deeply within him, stirring a sense of responsibility that he could no longer deny. The turning point came when Barron encountered a comment that cut through the digital noise like a bolt of lightning. It was a simple yet searing statement. "We don't have a voice. They don't care what we think. Maybe it's best to stay silent and accept our fate." In that moment, he recognized his own reflection in those words. The realization struck him with undeniable force. If every person continued to silence themselves, then injustice would persist, unchallenged and unaltered. His long-held silence, once a protective barrier, now felt like an act of surrender to a system that had already marginalized so many. Determined to break free from the shackles of inaction, Barron made a choice that would redefine his destiny. No longer content to be an aloof observer from the comforts of privilege, he resolved to step out into the tumultuous heart of America. Abandoning the insulated corridors of wealth and influence, he embarked on a journey to experience firsthand the struggles that so many faced every day. His first encounter was with Marcus, a college senior drowning in the burden of astronomical student debt. Marcus had once clung to the belief that hard work and academic excellence would secure a promising future, only to find that even his best efforts might not guarantee a decent job in a society increasingly indifferent to merit. The conversation with Marcus was a revelation for Barron. In the eyes of the young man, he saw the profound disillusionment of a generation that had been promised opportunity, but was instead met with economic hardship and relentless uncertainty. Next, Barron met Linda, a single mother whose life had been upended by the ceaseless advance of automation. Once a proud employee in a stable job, Linda now toiled through back-to-back night shifts for minimum wage, her every day a struggle to provide for her two young children. Her story, marked by both resilience and sorrow, shattered the illusion that success and security were the exclusive preserve of the privileged. In Linda's determined yet weary expression, Barron recognized the urgent need for fairness and compassion in a society that had long forgotten the value of human dignity. Each encounter left an indelible mark on Barron's soul. The faces and voices of those he met became a tapestry of lived reality, a stark contrast to the curated images and sanitized narratives of power that he had known all his life. In the wake of these encounters, the young man's perspective transformed dramatically. The quiet introspection of his past was replaced by a fervent resolve. If he remained silent, then the voices of countless others would be consigned to oblivion. Haunted by the inequities he had witnessed, Barron began to craft not a political manifesto, but a collection of stories. He wrote not for applause or the lure of fame, but to bear witness to the struggles of everyday people. His words flowed from a wellspring of empathy and determination. With each keystroke, he recounted the personal tragedies and the quiet heroism he had encountered, tales of hope amid despair, of resilience in the face of systemic failure. These writings were raw and unfiltered, stripping away the gloss of political rhetoric to reveal the human truth at their core. At home, the weight of his experiences led him to a pivotal conversation with his mother, a conversation that would alter the course of his future. In the quiet intimacy of their shared solitude, she urged him to listen, truly listen, to the hearts of those who had long been ignored. Her gentle yet powerful words became a clarion call, affirming that the first step toward meaningful change was to validate the voices of the unheard. With his mother's guidance echoing in his mind, Barron realized that to speak on behalf of others, he first had to understand their stories, to feel the pulse of their everyday struggles. This inner awakening set him on a path that was both daunting and inspiring. It was no longer enough to simply observe. He had to act. The once muted voice that had lain dormant for nearly 2 decades was now ignited by a newfound passion, a passion that was equal parts empathy and defiance. His decision to leave behind the familiar trappings of privilege and step into the reality of those who had been marginalized marked a profound transformation. Barron was not just preparing to give a speech, he was ready to become a conduit for change. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty and challenges, but the call for justice was louder than ever. As the young man immersed himself in the raw, unvarnished stories of America's underrepresented, a singular thought echoed through his mind: if not him, then who? If not now, then when? With that question burning at the forefront of his conscience, Barron resolved to harness the power of his own voice, one that had long been suppressed, to amplify the cries of those who had been silenced. And so, in the quiet aftermath of injustice and awakening, the stage was set for the next chapter of his journey. The whispers of change were building into a resounding chorus, and Barron Trump, once relegated to the shadows, was ready to step forward and confront the future head-on. In the wake of his soul-stirring encounters and the overwhelming tide of injustice he witnessed firsthand, Barron Trump found himself at a crossroads where inaction was no longer an option. The quiet aftershock of that pivotal night evolved into a relentless inner storm, a blend of sorrow, resolve, and a fervent desire to be the change he had seen so desperately needed. No longer was he content to be a silent bystander. The birth of a leader was emerging from within, fueled by the poignant stories of struggle and the burning questions of a generation left unheard. In the days that followed, Barron immersed himself in a world far removed from the sheltered corridors of privilege that had defined his earlier life. He journeyed through the city's heart, a city pulsing with the raw energy of resilience and despair. He witnessed the scars etched on the faces of those who had been battered by an uncaring system, and he listened, truly listened to their narratives. Each story added depth to his understanding. Each encounter left an indelible mark on his spirit, and slowly, the once muted voice that had been hidden away began to take shape. The transformation was not sudden, but rather a gradual evolution, an awakening of purpose that forced him to question everything he had once known. In the midst of crowded streets, amid the clamor of protests and the hushed conversations of those whose lives had been disrupted, Barron discovered that his silence had served only to mute the powerful call for justice that resonated in every corner of the nation. The voices of the young, the struggling, and the hopeful began to swell within him. They were not simply echoes of discontent, but a clarion call demanding that the world acknowledge their pain, their hopes, and their dreams. At home, the process of transformation unfolded in quiet moments of introspection and restless nights of relentless thought. In the solitude of his personal sanctuary, Barron pored over countless stories shared by everyday people, narratives that spanned the spectrum of human emotion, from despair to defiant hope. Every word, every tear-stained memory, and every silent plea contributed to the dawning realization that his voice could no longer remain captive. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet it was a burden he was ready to bear, driven by the conviction that change was possible only when the unheard were finally given the chance to speak their truth. Determined to step beyond the digital realm of social media and virtual expressions, Barron embarked on a mission to bring the raw, unfiltered stories of America into the light. His writings evolved from tentative musings into powerful narratives that captured the urgency of a generation crying out for fairness. He began hosting online discussions, where voices from all walks of life converged in a tapestry of shared struggles and collective hope. These virtual gatherings were more than just platforms for conversation. They were the crucibles in which a movement was forged, a movement where every word mattered and every story was a call to action. The momentum that built from these conversations was palpable. Young people, emboldened by Barron's authenticity, started to find their own voices. Communities that had long been marginalized began to rally together, their shared experiences fueling an ever-growing demand for change. Barron watched, both humbled and invigorated, as the narrative of a disenchanted generation transformed into a powerful testament to the strength of unity. What had begun as a solitary outcry against systemic neglect was now evolving into a symphony of collective action, a movement where every whisper of discontent could be amplified into a roar for justice. In this period of intense self-discovery, Barron also found himself grappling with the enormity of his new role. The transformation was not without its internal battles. Doubts and fears intermingled with his burgeoning resolve. Yet with every challenge he faced, the lessons of those he had met reinforced his determination. The stories of young people like Marcus, burdened under the crushing weight of debt, and the resilient struggles of individuals like Linda, fighting to provide for their families in a rapidly changing economy, served as constant reminders that his voice was not his alone. It was a vessel for countless lives yearning to be heard. With each passing day, as he refined his words and honed his message, Barron felt an unmistakable shift within. The transformation transcended the mere act of speaking. It was an evolution of character, a melding of youthful passion with the hard-earned wisdom gleaned from confronting injustice head-on. He realized that leadership was not defined by grand declarations or lofty titles, but by the willingness to stand up and bear witness to the truth, even when it meant exposing oneself to the risk of criticism and ridicule. In his quiet moments of reflection, Barron recalled a simple yet profound lesson imparted by his mother, a lesson about the power of listening. It was a reminder that genuine change begins when one not only speaks, but also listens deeply to the heartbeats of those around them. This ethos resonated within him, guiding his every decision. The stories he collected became the bedrock of his emerging identity as a leader who was not above the struggles of the people he aimed to represent, but was intimately intertwined with their hopes and hardships. As the anticipation of his first public address grew, so did the magnitude of his inner resolve. The weight of history, the voices of the past, and the promise of a better future coalesced into a singular, powerful vision, a vision where the silent could no longer be ignored and where the courage to speak out would become the catalyst for lasting change. Barron Trump was on the cusp of a transformation that would see him step from the shadows and into the center of a movement that demanded justice, equity, and the affirmation that every voice, no matter how small, was a vital thread in the fabric of a nation. In this crucible of determination and hope, the young leader prepared for the moment when his journey would truly begin, a moment when he would no longer be defined by a legacy of silence, but by a commitment to uplift every unheard cry and every forgotten story. And as the day of his first major public speech loomed ever closer, Barron felt not the tremors of fear, but the steady pulse of purpose, a pulse that would soon resonate across an entire nation, heralding the emergence of a voice that was destined to change everything. The day that Barron had been preparing for, with a mix of trepidation and fierce determination, finally arrived. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the city was still wrapped in a slumbering calm, Barron sat at his desk in a small, modest room far removed from the palatial comforts of his past. Here, every scribbled note and handwritten reminder of the voices he had met resonated like a heartbeat, a steady pulse urging him to step beyond silence and into the spotlight of truth. He had spent countless sleepless nights revisiting the stories of Marcus, Linda, and the myriad individuals whose lives had been upended by a system that seemed indifferent to their struggles. Their faces had become a mosaic in his mind, each a vivid reminder of why his voice now mattered. In that room, with only the soft glow of a desk lamp for company, Barron rehearsed his speech. Every word, every pause was chosen with care to capture the raw emotion and authenticity that had taken root within him. It was no longer about political grandstanding or the pursuit of power. It was about bearing witness to the collective pain and hope of an entire generation. When the time came, Barron stepped into a stark, bustling corridor that led to the auditorium. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the anticipation of an audience hungry for change. He paused at the threshold, his heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and purpose. In that moment, memories of his mother's comforting presence flooded back, her gentle reminder that he was not alone, that the voices of those he had met would be with him every step of the way. With her silent yet unwavering support etched in his mind, he took his first step onto the stage. Under the harsh glare of the stage lights, Barron's silhouette merged with the shadows of the past he was determined to leave behind. The auditorium was packed. Students, activists, community leaders, and even skeptics had gathered, each person waiting for a message that promised to cut through years of silence and indifference. The stage felt vast yet intimate, as if every seat was filled by someone whose life was about to be transformed by his words. For a long, breathless moment, silence reigned. Barron's eyes scanned the room, a sea of expectant faces, some filled with hope, others with caution, and a few masked by doubt. He began, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. "I have been silent for 18 years, he declared, the simple statement reverberating through the hall like a starting gun. In that instant, the crowd leaned in as if collectively holding its breath. His voice, once stifled by the pressures of expectation, now emerged with a quiet power that spoke directly to the hearts of every listener. Barron recounted the injustices that had shaped his recent journey, the soaring student debt that suffocated dreams, the disappearing jobs replaced by the unyielding march of automation, and the cold, indifferent gaze of a system that had long forgotten the value of every human life. With each carefully chosen word, he painted a picture of a nation divided by neglect, yet also united by a shared longing for fairness and dignity. His narrative was interlaced with personal reflections, moments of doubt, flashes of anger, and ultimately a burgeoning resolve to be the voice for those too often left unheard. As he spoke, the auditorium transformed. The initial murmur of uncertainty gave way to a stirring of collective emotion. Faces in the crowd began to mirror his passion. Tears glistened in the eyes of some, while others nodded in quiet agreement. In that charged environment, the barrier between speaker and listener dissolved. It was as if every person present was intimately connected by the simple truth that their struggles mattered. He continued, his voice steady and insistent. "If we all remain silent, who will speak for the millions who have been crushed by a system that thrives on our indifference? Today, I choose to speak not just for myself, but for every voice that has been silenced by fear, neglect, and a sense of hopelessness. We deserve a future where our dreams are not weighed down by debt, where our work is respected, and where our voices matter." With every word, Barron wove together his personal metamorphosis with the larger narrative of a nation in need of change. The energy in the room swelled. Whispers of agreement transformed into resounding applause. For a brief, transcendent moment, the challenges of a divided society were eclipsed by the undeniable power of a unified call for justice. Yet even as the applause thundered through the auditorium, Barron remained acutely aware of the skepticism that lurked beyond the immediate warmth of the crowd. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with questions and criticisms, that his journey from silence to speech might be dismissed by some as mere bravado from a life of privilege. But in that moment, those doubts were drowned out by the resolute conviction that had guided him from his very first step into that stage. Drawing a deep breath, he addressed the lingering question that had haunted him and his critics alike. What if I fail? What if my words are met with silence once again? His eyes locked with those in the front row, and in that exchange, he conveyed an unspoken promise. A promise that failure was not a defeat, but a step toward continuous growth. "I have come to understand that even the smallest voice, when united with others, can ignite the flames of a movement. I stand here today not as a perfect leader, but as a fellow human being determined to listen, to learn, and to lead by example." As his speech drew to a close, the auditorium erupted into a standing ovation. The sound was not merely applause, it was the manifestation of a collective awakening. In that thunderous celebration, Barron Trump had not only found his voice, but had also sparked a movement that promised to challenge the status quo. The cheers, the fervent clapping, and the sincere expressions of hope from those present signified that a new chapter was beginning, one where every silent story would have the chance to be heard, and every person, regardless of their background, would find a reason to believe in the power of their own voice. In that moment of triumph, as Barron stepped away from the microphone, the echoes of his words lingered in the air. The journey from a life of enforced silence to the bold proclamation of truth had not been easy, but it had paved the way for a future where change was not only possible, it was inevitable. The movement was just beginning, and with it, a renewed belief that when the unheard finally speak, the world listens. In the wake of that unforgettable night on stage, something transformative began to ripple across the nation. As the echoes of his speech reverberated in countless living rooms, social media feeds, and community gatherings, Barron Trump's words ignited a spark that would soon blaze into a formidable movement. Overnight, he was no longer seen merely as a figure from a storied family. He had emerged as a beacon of hope for a generation eager to be heard. In the days that followed, the power of his message revealed itself in the most unexpected ways. Youth forums sprang up in neighborhoods across the country, each one pulsing with the energy of individuals individuals who had been moved to action by his call for justice and unity. Students organized impromptu meetings on college campuses, discussing the systemic challenges that had long been ignored, debates on rising tuition fees, the plight of automation replacing jobs, and the broader economic forces that seemed to trap ordinary people in cycles of despair. What had begun as scattered murmurs of discontent soon coalesced into a resounding chorus demanding reform. Barron, meanwhile, embraced his new role with humility and determination. Far from retreating into the comfort of his once isolated world, he found himself reaching out to those whose voices he had long admired from afar. Late-night video calls became a routine as he connected with activists, educators, and community leaders. He listened intently to their stories of resilience in the face of systemic neglect, of dreams deferred by circumstances beyond control, and of a burning desire for a future where fairness was not a distant promise, but a living reality. Every conversation deepened his understanding of the nation's multifaceted struggles. A young teacher from a small Midwestern town recounted her battle against underfunded schools and outdated curricula, explaining how her students, though brilliant and creative, were often left to navigate a broken system with little hope for a meaningful change. A factory worker from the industrial heartland described the abrupt loss of his livelihood as his role was replaced by machines, leaving him and his colleagues adrift in an economy that prized profit over human dignity. These voices, so raw and unfiltered, underscored the urgent need for a transformative dialogue, one that transcended political rhetoric and reached straight into the core of everyday life. Inspired by these first-hand accounts, Barron set about using his burgeoning platform to champion not just abstract ideals, but concrete solutions. He began organizing a series of online discussions and live-stream town hall meetings, creating spaces where people could share their experiences and brainstorm practical ways to tackle the challenges they faced. These forums quickly evolved into vibrant communities of support and action. Ideas flowed freely, ranging from proposals for affordable education and job retraining programs to grassroots initiatives designed to hold local governments accountable. In these digital roundtables, every voice, no matter how quiet or tentative, found its echo in a growing chorus for change. As the movement gathered momentum, the media took notice. Headlines proclaimed that a new era had begun, a time when the voices of the unheard were finally resonating across the corridors of power. Yet as praise mounted, so too did the scrutiny. Critics questioned Barron's background, labeling him as yet another privileged scion attempting to parlay his family name into political capital. Skeptics argued that his message was nothing more than a rehearsed performance, dismissing his impassioned speeches as the work of a young man untested by the harsh realities he claimed to represent. Undeterred by the barrage of criticism, Barron continued to speak with unwavering sincerity. He appeared on local radio shows, participated in televised debates, and engaged directly with detractors on social media. Each interaction, whether filled with support or scorn, only served to deepen his commitment to the cause. He knew that every challenge he faced was part of a larger struggle, a fight not only for his own credibility, but for the right of every disenfranchised voice to be heard. His resolve grew stronger with every conversation, every encounter with someone who felt overlooked by a system that had long celebrated the status quo. In a series of heartfelt letters and posts shared online, Barron recounted his personal journey from silence to speech. He wrote of the long nights spent wrestling with doubt and fear, and of the quiet determination that had propelled him to break free from a legacy of enforced muteness. His words resonated deeply with many who had once felt powerless. Young people began to write back, sharing their own struggles and hopes, and thanking him for finally giving a name to their collective pain. Teachers, workers, and community organizers alike found solace and inspiration in his candid admissions and bold vision for the future. This groundswell of support reached even the corridors of established institutions. Progressive political leaders, recognizing the movement's undeniable impact, began to invite Barron to speak at policy forums and legislative meetings. While some questioned his inexperience, many saw in him a rare authenticity, a willingness to listen, learn, and lead by example. His message was simple, yet profound. Real change begins with each individual who refuses to remain silent. It was a call for collective responsibility, a plea for unity in the face of systemic inequality, and a reminder that every small act of courage contributes to the greater good. Yet as the movement surged forward, Barron remained ever mindful of the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He often recalled the faces of Marcus and Linda, the young man burdened by debt, and the single mother fighting to keep her family afloat. Their stories were not isolated tragedies, they were emblematic of a broader reality that demanded action. In his quiet moments of of reflection, he would revisit the words of his mother, who had once assured him that his voice, when used to uplift others, would become a force for undeniable change. And so, as rallies were organized, petitions circulated, and grassroots campaigns sprang up in communities across America, Barron Trump's journey continued to evolve. The movement he had helped ignite was no longer centered solely on his words. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of unity and the relentless pursuit of justice. Every conversation, every shared story, and every act of courage added to the momentum of a collective force that refused to be silenced. In this era of rising momentum and resonant echoes of change, the seeds of transformation were firmly planted. Barron, once a silent observer in the shadows of a storied legacy, had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even the smallest voice can spark a revolution. The movement was just beginning to take shape, and as the country braced for the next chapter in its turbulent journey, one question echoed through every corner of the nation: what if together we dare to speak up, to listen, and to forge a future where every voice matters? In the wake of an electrifying movement that had swept across the nation, Barron Trump found himself at the helm of a burgeoning revolution, a revolution built not on empty promises, but on the raw, unfiltered truth of everyday struggle and hope. As the days turned into weeks and the movement grew into an unstoppable force, the entire country felt the tremors of change, echoing from every corner of its sprawling cities to the quiet hum of small-town streets. Across America, communities once resigned to silence began to reawaken. In crowded town halls, under the banner of a shared purpose, voices that had long been stifled now spoke up with a fervor that was as inspiring as it was transformative. Barron's message of unity, empowerment, and relentless courage had taken on a life of its own, evolving into a tapestry of personal stories and collective aspirations that transcended political affiliation, economic status, and geographic boundaries. The movement was no longer defined solely by Barron's speeches or the headlines that chronicled his journey from a silent observer to a passionate leader. It had become a living, breathing force, a convergence of young activists, dedicated community organizers, progressive lawmakers, and everyday citizens determined to rewrite the narrative of their future. In every impassioned conversation at coffee shops, every spirited town hall meeting in school gymnasiums, and every viral video shared online, there was a resounding declaration that the time for change had come. Barron continued to lead with the quiet strength and authenticity that had first captivated so many hearts. He dedicated himself to amplifying the stories of those who had been overlooked for far too long: the college students drowning in debt, the factory workers whose jobs had been erased by automation, the single parents juggling multiple shifts to make ends meet, and the countless others who had felt invisible in a system that prized profit over people. With unwavering determination, he traveled the country, organizing forums and workshops where the focus was not just on speaking out, but on listening deeply. His goal was to ensure that every voice could contribute to shaping policies that truly reflected the needs and dreams of the people. As the movement matured, the impact of Barron's journey began to manifest in tangible reforms. In several cities, grassroots initiatives led to the introduction of progressive education reforms aimed at reducing the burden of student debt and expanding access to quality higher education. In industrial regions, local governments, spurred by heated dialogues and persistent advocacy, initiated programs to retrain workers whose jobs had been rendered obsolete by technological advancements. Even in boardrooms of established corporations, the call for fairer labor practices resonated, forcing decision makers to reconsider the human cost of relentless efficiency. Yet the road ahead was far from smooth. The establishment, threatened by the seismic shift in power, rallied against the wave of change with fierce resistance. Veteran politicians and media pundits questioned the authenticity and feasibility of a movement led by someone from a background of privilege. They accused Barron of opportunism and of merely capitalizing on a fleeting moment of public discontent. Headlines emerged that cast doubt on his motives, and debates flared on every network, turning the conversation into a battleground of cynicism versus hope. But amid the noise of criticism, Barron remained resolute. In a poignant interview that captured the nation's attention, he spoke with calm conviction. I understand the skepticism. I come from a world that many see as untouchable, insulated by wealth and legacy. But I stand here today not as an isolated figure, but as one among you. I have listened, I have learned, and I have felt the heartbeat of our nation in the stories of every person who dares to dream of a fairer future. This movement is not about me, it is about us. It is about the power of our voices, united in the pursuit of justice. Change is not the product of a single speech or solitary act. It is the culmination of our collective courage and determination. His words resonated across social media platforms, igniting further action. People from all walks of life joined the conversation, sharing their own experiences and visions for a better tomorrow. University campuses, once arenas of quiet protest, transformed into vibrant hubs of activism where policy proposals were debated with the same passion as local sports. Community leaders collaborated with policymakers, driven by the shared realization that a movement fueled by genuine human connection could reshape the very foundations of society. Barron's journey, once marked by his solitary stand on a stage, had evolved into a relentless drive to build bridges between disparate voices. His team, composed of impassioned young individuals and experienced community organizers, worked tirelessly to create platforms that allowed every citizen to contribute to the dialogue on reform. Together, they launched nationwide initiatives, from open mic sessions in public libraries to interactive digital town halls, that celebrated the diversity of thought and experience. Each initiative served as a reminder that change is an ongoing conversation, one that requires continuous engagement, compassion, and most of all, the courage to keep speaking up even when the odds seem insurmountable. As the movement forged ahead, the country began to witness small yet significant victories. Legislative proposals addressing educational affordability and job security made their way through local councils and even into the halls of national governance. Community centers began offering free workshops on financial literacy and career retraining, empowering people with the knowledge and skills they needed to thrive in a rapidly changing economy. And while the battle for systemic reform was far from over, the energy that had once emanated from a single stage had now transformed into an enduring force, a force capable of challenging entrenched power structures and rewriting the future. In a final, stirring address broadcast to millions, Barron encapsulated the spirit of the movement with words that carried both a promise and a challenge. Our future is not a gift, it is a creation. Every voice matters, every story counts, and every act of courage brings us one step closer to a society where justice is not just a word, but a reality for all. Let us continue to speak, to listen, and to build a future that honors the dignity of every human life. The time is now. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? As his message faded into the quiet hum of a nation poised on the brink of transformation, one truth remained undeniable. The power to change the world lay not in the hands of a privileged few, but in the collective will of those who dared to break their silence. The movement that began with one young man's brave decision to speak up had grown into a resounding chorus of hope, a chorus that would continue to echo across generations, inspiring future leaders to carry the torch of justice forward. And so, as the first light of a new dawn illuminated a country in the midst of profound change, Barron Trump and the awakening voice of a generation reminded us all that every revolution starts with a single question: if not now, then when? If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing stories. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you'll never miss our newest uploads.